Hi, guys, and welcome to another episode of Lauren Rumpler Productions. Today, I have Max Borders. I am so excited to have him because he is a persuasion guru. This man knows how to speak to people, and we need more of that in the liberty movement because I don't know if you've ever had an argument with a libertarian, but it can be a little scary. So Max, why don't you tell us about what you do and how you got involved in studying persuasion?
Well, thank you very much, by the way. And I have to say, the way I got involved, let's start with what I do. I'm a magazine editor. If you've ever read the Freeman, which is a very old publication of the Foundation for Economic Education, I'm the editor of that magazine. I carry a very big and important torch, and I walk in very, very big shoes. It's a great honor for me to do that every day. So one of the things I do is try to get the pieces that come in and the pieces I write to be persuasive in the Freeman, which is in print and online, number one. Number two, I'm the author of a book, Super Wealth, Why We Shouldn't Worry About the Gap Between Rich and Poor, or why we should stop worrying about the gap between rich and poor. And the book is on the question of inequality. Why should it matter? And third, I'm the co-founder of an event in Austin, Texas, where I live, called Voice and Exit. I encourage everybody to come to it. It's sort of like a radical cool TED conference with a festival blended in.
And who doesn't like TED?
Yeah, I know TED is so
TED
cool.
TED
is seductive. So it's TED with a twist.
It is seductive. I like that word.
It's a sexier TED. It's a sexier, more interesting, a little more radical TED.
I'm going to have to go to this.
Yeah, you got to come.
This sounds really exciting.
Yeah.
It sounds right up my alley. So for the whole interview, I'm probably going to picture you wearing a torch, which is great. So anyway, I wanted to talk to you today about persuasion because it's something I've been wanting to emphasize with my audience more, because it's not just about knowing the ideas. Mm-hmm. You have to actually be able to communicate them.
Yeah.
And if you can't communicate them, we can't grow the movement, because, our society has been bred to be disinterested in reading and, even just the news. I mean, they don't even watch the news.
Right.
And they watch, Jon Stewart.
Right. He's retiring.
Which is not really. Oh, yeah, I heard about that.
Yeah. I don't know what he's doing. He's probably going to do something else fun. Who knows? But at the moment, he's off the Daily Show, and we'll see what happens.
So we'll see what they do. Probably they'll watch the Colbert Report instead. But the point is that this isn't real news. I mean, it's entertainment news. And it's certainly very liberal. So we're not getting a libertarian perspective out there. And even if you do watch the mainstream media, there's no libertarian perspective. So we need effective communicators in the movement in order to grow it, because nobody's going to do it for us. And the majority of people are against our ideas to begin with. So can you tell us a little bit about why you think persuasion is so important?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I want to admit something right now that
it's okay.
Yeah, I want to admit it.
This is a safe space.
I've evolved in certain respects, but I have to say that I owe my career to the work of Ayn Rand. Right? I am not a Randian, but
oh my goodness.
But yeah, I mean, like many other people, my story started with someone handing me the Fountainhead.
Oh.
And the Fountainhead is a wonderful book. It's a good book, especially for a testosterone filled 16, 17-year-old, whatever I was. And I have to say, what Ayn Rand was able to do with my adolescent brain had less to do with reason and more to do with the passions, the sentiments. And so what I'm trying to say is, maybe you and I have talked about this prior to the interview, but there's a metaphor that the psychologist Jonathan Haidt uses. That metaphor is that of the elephant and the rider. And the elephant and the rider metaphor is to talk about the relationship between the intuitions on the one hand, the elephant, and the rider sitting on top, and that's the reason. And a lot of libertarians, what they try to do is to appeal first to the reason, to the argument, the rational argumentation. Yes. And they think that it's just gonna glow. The light of reason is just gonna glow, and everybody's gonna bask in its glow, and we're all gonna be converted by virtue of this wonderful, elegant, crystal clear reason theory.
And
bullshit.
How can you like bask in a glow of somebody yelling at you.
Well, and that's the other problem. This is just the approach is generally falls flat with a lot of libertarians and a lot of objectivists and the like. But we really do need to try to take into account how human beings are, and how they think, how they reason, but more importantly, how they feel, what their moral intuitions are.
Right. So, yeah, I agree with you. So I've been teaching for a long time to my audience, how emotions have a place. And I think that this is a very good example of where emotions have a place.
Mm-hmm.
And so I promote the idea that you should use reason and rationality over emotions. But I'm going to tell you guys, in this instance, it's actually more helpful to understand emotions. So people are irrational, and to not take into account irrationality, that's not rational.
Well,
so Spock is not actually rational. A lot of people say, Spock
mm-hmm.
from Star Trek is rational,
yeah.
but he's not, because he's so rational, he doesn't take into consideration the irrational, the emotional, that he's not on track. He can't make good decisions because he discounts the irrational even being a possibility.
Well, Jonathan Haidt in the book The Righteous Mind, which is I highly recommend for anyone, despite wherever he comes from on the political spectrum, it doesn't matter. It's a fantastic book. What he says is that people whose brains have whose I guess the prefrontal cortex has been damaged in some way have really, really tough time making decisions, because we don't make decisions based on rationality. We make decisions based on emotion and on not irrationality, but non-rational considerations.
Right.
We feel first, and we engage in post hoc rationalization later.
Right.
And he can essentially prove this through not only the data that he gathers through asking people different kind of survey questions, but through sort of the neurological and cognitive science that he's engaged in and others have engaged in. So we are evolved creatures, and we evolved certain kind of predilections. We are not, as Ayn Rand said, for example, blank slates. We are evolved creatures. We're very strange. We have emotions, and they balance and they serve a very important function in tandem with reason. We have to recognize that. And once we do, we're much more effective persuaders.
Right. And I don't think Ayn Rand discounted that we normally we feel emotions before we think about things. Mm-hmm. I think that was, is pretty obvious. I mean, watching any human being and based on the study that you cited. But it's really about in the normal day-to-day life, not in communication, but in the day-to-day life, it's important to overcome that initial feeling, to think about it before taking action. Mm-hmm. So the action, it's okay to feel things. It's just the action needs to come from a well thought out process. But the point is that, getting back to the persuasion of the matter, is that people are emotional. They do things from an emotional standpoint, and often libertarians who try to live rationally don't understand why certain people do things, or can't understand why other people aren't getting it when they try to communicate ideas.
Let me offer you an example.
Right.
Okay, let's pretend, and for the moment here, and you're a lovely young woman, so I don't want to insult you by saying this. Okay, we're just going to play a game here for a second.
Let's play a game.
All right, it's a thought experiment.
Okay.
Let's assume that you're the member of a tribe called the Z tribe.
Z tribe.
All right, and I'm the member of the X tribe.
Z tribe.
All right, and you guys are sort of Paleolithic tribe. I'm a member of a Paleolithic tribe. We're competing for resources in the jungle.
Right.
Or in the Paleolithic steppe on the savannas of Africa. Okay, and you and I encounter each other, and we both see something we want, and that's a rabbit. Now, are you going to give me some axioms? Are you going to give me some kind of story about property rights? Are you going to we're going to look at it. We're either going to suss each other and decide whether we can trust each other, right? Mm-hmm. You're attractive enough that you probably bat your eyes and I'd just give you the damn bunny.
Of course.
But we might be a really hungry tribe, and so I might try to kill it and take it back to the others, and
or kill me,
or fight you over it, or whatever. So we're gonna
less Z tribe.
So in order for us to establish trust and maybe trade, maybe you have something that we have some kind of deal we can work out. But there's no deals before we begin to trust each other.
Right.
So we have to have social cues and different kind of things involved. This isn't a process necessarily of rationality. It's a mixture of rationality, of quick judgments, intuitions, and other neurological processes cognitive processes that are involved and mixed up with reason, but there are also some fight or flight mechanisms involved and other things. And I may try to persuade you, hey, let me have it this time. Or I might say, you can trust me. It's okay. We don't want to fight. Right? But all those processes are happening really quickly. And I might not be able to construct a freaking syllogism in order to let me have the rabbit. See what I'm saying?
I am seeing what you're saying.
What I'm trying to unpack with this little story is that we're evolved creatures, and we're still cave people to some degree. And we've never been able to just completely shed ourselves of our cave person ancestry.
Yeah.
And so part of what the power of persuasion is recognizing that, acknowledging that, and folding it into your persuasive strategy.
That's really great. That's awesome advice. Yeah. You definitely need to build a kind of trust with your audience before you can really engage with them. And that's understanding where they're coming from. And that's another good point to persuasion, is being able to understand where the person is coming from and understanding their values. And I believe that you talked about that in your persuasion talk that you gave here at ISFLC. And you talked about how you have to understand other people's values. And so could you give us a little taste of that?
Sure. And I want to, I've mentioned his name already in this, and I think a lot of credit is due to the work of Jonathan Haidt. Jonathan Haidt's book, The Righteous Mind, is fantastic. I say again, get it. And there's one metaphor in there he uses. And by the way, the use of metaphor is a great persuasive strategy, because with metaphor, you can get a lot of information in one little tidbit that you would otherwise have to explain in literal language. It's very concise, very easy to download people's brain using metaphor, not necessarily rational argument. So there's an example. But he gives us the metaphor to prove my point. He gives us the metaphor of taste buds. And he says, imagine the brain has a kind of taste bud, but it's a moral matrix. So it's analogous to taste buds. We have salty, sweet, bitter, sour, and so on. But the brain also has sort of these moral centers, these moral matrices, which I like to, in other contexts, called moral languages, that he wants us to be fluent in. He wants us to recognize. It's harder for people to be fluent in other moral languages or to learn to taste other moral tastes when we're not born with them being that active. So let me explain what I mean.
Interesting. Yeah. Please do.
So if you're born without the taste salt, and I have a family member who's born without being able to taste salt, you would never know what it's like to want to have this deep-seated care instinct, for example. Let's say care and salt are analogous. Imagine being born not tasting salt. You'd go into the ocean, you'd think it's fresh water. That's crazy.
That is crazy.
Then that's like someone who doesn't care about other people, going around in the world and just sees someone who's suffering and goes, right?
Right.
So we have to. Now, most of us do have a care center. We have our family members that we care about, and so on and so forth. We see someone on the street who's suffering. We at least we reflect on that and go, oh, it's really sad. Some people have a heightened sense, heightened taste, brain function, that when they see suffering, their brain goes nuts. Or when they see inequality of outcome, their brain really activates. People who self-identify as libertarian, boy, when they see an affront to autonomy or liberty, they don't like it. People who see an affront to fairness, these are these moral matrices I'm talking about: fairness, loyalty, autonomy, the sacred, the idea of the sacred. All of these are things that Haidt lists. If you think of those as being sort of levers of moral suasion, then you can really start to reframe your arguments and reframe your approaches to get people to think like you do. Because liberty can be an underlying superstructure for all of the other moral dimensions. You can make it that way. And libertarians tend to do that, of course, because we say, I'm free to care. I'm free to pray. I'm free to do this. I'm free to do that. You see what I'm saying? And once you show that liberty cradles all of these other facets of morality and our moral makeup as human beings, then you can talk people into being pro-liberty, for example, without just saying, but this is an axiom. but this is an axiom. You know, and most people don't
so
even know what the
funny
hell an
because
axiom is, much less.
There are people here that like do that.
Oh yeah,
just here at this conference.
I did that for years in my life.
Yeah.
And I realized it was more important to be effective than to be right.
Yes,
and then I turned out to be right in the process.
That's the real important thing, guys. It is not about being right. It's about being effective, because you're already right, and you know that. You don't need to prove it to the person that you're with. I mean, I've talked to you guys about the idea of pride and self-esteem. If you have correct pride and self-esteem, it shouldn't factor into the conversations that you're having. Your self-esteem should not come from being able to properly persuade this person into, you know, becoming part of the movement, or that you're right about whatever you're speaking on. It should be about being able to effectively bring more people to this way of living.
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you're not out there to move the needle, if you're out there to hold your rectitude, like just like a hard gem to your chest, my precious, I'm right, then what you're doing is essentially off-putting to people. And so what you want to do is open your heart a little bit, open your mind a little bit to their way of seeing, and you learn to speak in their moral language. Then I don't want to sound insidious, or I don't want to sound manipulating, but you can learn to game them a little bit. You can start reframing your language and things that push their moral buttons in their brain. And you can bring them over to your way of thinking, which is that people ought to be free, fundamentally.
That is so great. So I just want to thank Max for being on again. He is so fabulous. But then again, he teaches communication, so of course he's charming.
You're too sweet. Thank you so much.
So I want to have Max back on in the future to talk more about persuasion, because I think it's so incredibly important. If we're going to have these ideas and we're going to try and live in the kind of society that we would like to live in, we need to be effective communicators, and we need to change hearts and minds. And so with that, I hope you guys had a great time. Max, where can they find more stuff from you? The Freeman magazine? Yeah,
Freeman. The Freeman, it's the original sort of libertarian publication. It was started in 1930. Gosh, I should know this, but in the 1930s. It's part of the original libertarian think tank, fee.org. You can find it there. And I'd love for you to find my writing there.
Fantastic. Well, I will probably share some of your writing, because it's just as amazing as you are. So remember, guys, knowledge is not for all men, but for those who seek it. So keep seeking.